And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this fabulous Brisbane morning. Yes, 17 degrees and sunny right here in Brisbane. Looking wonderful, a glorious day out there. Hey, today we have got quite a few things to go through. First of all, we have our daily news report. Then we have a very special interview by Cancer Council of Queensland, especially looking into the childhood cancer. And very special, we'll have two guests joining us in the studio via video links. So that would be wonderful to get their insight into what is happening right there. And of course, then we'll finish off with our daily India report. Right now, let's get into the news segment and take a look. Well, first of all, you know that federal government's promise to scrap the cashless debit card. So there are mixed views over that. What are those views? Let's take a look.
9 wishes, said Hippo, and he made his first wish.
Karen Griffiths says her humiliation is nearly over. A 3-year trial that limited the single mother's access to cash is finally coming to an end.
That way. I'm not anticipating like I'll get off it tomorrow or anything like that, but the point is I will be getting off it eventually. There is hope for the future, and soon I can get my life back.
730 first spoke to the mother of 5 in 2019. Karen had just been forced onto a cashless debit card run by the private company Indue, which effectively quarantined 80% of her welfare benefit to ensure she didn't buy alcohol or gamble. The lack of cash, she complained, made it difficult to buy second-hand goods, and over the years it hasn't got any easier.
It's never as simple as the way it's written on paper, you know, and the problem with half of the politicians is they're only looking at what's written on the paper. They're not interested in the lived experiences.
80% of his welfare payment is paid onto this card.
Karen Griffiths is one of more than 16,000 people in 6 regions across Australia taking part in the cashless debit card trial.
I'm hoping this won't work, because that's what...
The aim was to reduce the rate of welfare dependency, drug and alcohol abuse and homelessness. It's been deeply divisive.
This is a flawed approach. The government doesn't have the evidence that it works.
Welfare is supposed to be a hand up. It is not supposed to be a career choice.
What crime did they commit? It's not a crime to receive social security payments.
First introduced in South Australia's Ceduna region and Western Australia's East Kimberley in 2016, the trial was later extended to WA's Goldfields, Bundaberg and Hervey Bay, Cape York, and last year it was up and running in the Northern Territory.
What was in common with each of these areas is a lack of a lot of employment opportunities.
But the hard evidence for imposing this card is missing. An Auditor General's report handed down just after the federal election found the Department of Social Services monitoring and evaluation of the trial was inadequate, and the department couldn't show the card met its intended objectives.
That's upsetting to me. I mean, it's almost like they're guinea pigs in this experiment that nobody was actually analysing.
The mayors of the 2 councils in the Bundaberg-Hervey Bay trial site are opposed to the card, but that hasn't dimmed the enthusiasm of the Federal National Party MP, Keith Pitt. Do you accept that your views are very much in the minority?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, if that was true, I would have lost the last 2 elections, not won them.
Despite the criticisms of the Auditor General, Keith Pitt remains a true believer.
The feedback that we've been given, that's across the community, is it's had a positive impact, it's had a positive change.
That's anecdotal.
Oh, well, once again, it's the information I have.
Anecdotal evidence is the lowest form of evidence. So policy making by anecdote is a very dangerous thing.
Dr Shelley Bellerfeld undertook independent research of the card, not only in Keith Pitt's electorate, but also in the other 5 trial sites which, unlike Bundaberg-Hervey Bay, all have large Indigenous populations. Although she found a range of views about the card, she says the department tended to rely on those voices in support.
And what's happened with the cashless debit card is that some voices of power holders in communities were given the equivalent of a microphone or a megaphone in front of them, and some voices were dialed right down in volume.
One of the higher profile supporters of the card is East Kimberley Indigenous leader Ian Trust.
Generally, I think that for a certain target group such as old people, women and so on, they would be protected from harassment, or they call it humbugging up here for their money. I think it had a big impact on gambling.
With the new Labor government promising to abolish the card, Ian Trust is keen to hear what will be put in its place. He fears making it voluntary could make things worse.
The people that whose the card should be targeted at is probably the first one's going to be put their hand up, so we want to come off.
So it will be very interesting to see how that turns out. Of course, there has lots of merits on it as well, as people cannot use it on gambling or buying liquor, but can use it only on essential things as well. Well, right now we'll go to South Australia.
Burnt out and disillusioned. That's how a meeting of Police Association delegates described the state of the force today.
I can tell you now that I have never in my 35-year career seen morale in SAPOL as low as it is at the moment.
The crisis meeting comes after more than 2 years of police officers stationed on the state's borders, in many hotels, and running restriction compliance checks through the pandemic. Now, fewer than 10 sworn officers remain on COVID duties in the state. But the force is still recovering, with more officers quitting or retiring and fewer new recruits coming through.
I certainly acknowledge there's a high level of fatigue and that the frontline workers are under significant pressure at the moment.
The Police Association wants officers working behind the scenes to be redeployed to the front line, any barriers to recruitment removed, and getting former officers back on the beat.
What the Police Commissioner can do is to get on the phones to those that have left in the last 2 or 3 years, even some of our retirees, offer them term contracts to come back in to assist throughout this crisis.
The Police Commissioner says he's doing just that, but many officers delayed retirement during COVID and are leaving now. He's flagged a more aggressive recruitment approach, even poaching from interstate, and those who previously applied but weren't selected.
We are recontacting people who have applied in certain circumstances based on the reasons for their being unsuccessful.
The Commissioner says despite the workforce pressures, people who need police urgently will still get them on time. Leah McLennan.
So there you are, always that crisis, and the Police Commissioner has mentioned that he's doing that, meaning contacting the people who were unsuccessful based on some of the points, and of course, some of the retirees who might come and fill in for a little while as well. Right now, let's move to Victoria.
A new milestone marked with an old tradition as Parliament paused to create history.
My people, the First Peoples, now have a voice.
Politicians took a back seat as Indigenous leaders took the stand, urging MPs to support new laws to set up the country's first treaty authority.
First Peoples in Victoria live in the shadow of colonisation, and it follows us everywhere we go.
We were driven from our lands, murdered, herded onto reserves, torn apart from our families. We've been unfairly targeted and discriminated against for generations.
The laws, which have bipartisan support, will give the authority legal powers to facilitate treaty negotiations and resolve disputes between Indigenous Victorians and the government.
Don't look back on this moment in years to come to see yourself on the wrong side of history. Instead, step into this moment and have the courage to help create change.
But while the momentous occasion received a standing ovation, opposition backbencher Tim Smith refused to clap with his colleagues, vowing to cross the floor to vote against the bill.
Divisive tokenism, like this treaty, further perpetuates the further undermining of Australia's unity.
This notion that somehow this is special treatment, I'd be a bit more focused on the treatment of Aboriginal people over many, many years.
Parliament is expected to pass the laws tomorrow. Bridget Rollison, ABC.
And it will be interesting to see how it all turns out as well. But reconciliation has been long due. Right now, let's go to Adelaide.
Plans to upgrade the system that keeps an eye on you in the Adelaide CBD have set tongues wagging, but the council has seen and heard enough.
This has caused consternation and fear.
Confirming at a special meeting that it had not and would not purchase facial recognition technology for its new CCTV network.
It's all well and good, and it is important that our security agencies use this technology in order to catch criminals, but it's our job as elected members representing the public to keep a check on that power.
The council owns the camera network, but police monitor it. Last year, council passed a resolution asking police not to use the technology until laws governing its use were in place. It was a commitment police were not prepared to give.
And I'm certainly keen to take advantage of advances in technology that make it easier for police officers to respond to and detect crime and hold people accountable for the crimes they commit.
Last night, council officials clarified that they had bought cameras capable of recognising faces, but without the software or hardware required to make it work, meaning police won't be able to use them for that purpose.
This type of infrastructure is not cheap, and I wouldn't speculate in terms of how we might implement something like that.
They will not be able to run facial recognition technology over our live feed that we provide them with. They just don't have the capability to do that.
The council says it may review its position on facial recognition if laws are passed to govern its use, something state and federal governments are considering. Patrick Martin, ABC.
Yes, and that is something, well, these days there is some security, cameras are everywhere, facial recognition, artificial intelligence. So, this is the information technology age. Well, right now, let's go to Canberra.
These stocky little creatures are more powerful than they look, and they're fiercely territorial. But when some residential developments begin construction, they face the risk of being displaced, injured or killed.
You can't just expect when you start developing that they will hop away or fly away like kangaroos or birds.
Yolandi Vermark says wombats aren't being protected on some development sites, leaving wildlife advocacy organisations out of the consultation process entirely.
Because they are sleeping underground, by the time you do construction and you send your demolition trucks and dozers in, you will be destroying their homes and their burrows, which poses an animal welfare risk because you could crush them or leave them with really serious injuries.
She's also been lobbying for permanent wildlife signage on the sites after a wombat was killed by a motorist near a new development in Queanbeyan last week. Yolandi says the work to protect wombats needs to begin earlier, with many initial environmental impact assessments for these developments failing to mention wombats at all.
One of the things that they look at are animals, fauna and flora on the threatened species list. And because the bare-nosed wombat is not threatened or on any list, they're not taken into consideration in the same way that, for example, the pink-tailed lizard would be, or a yellow box.
Wombat Rescue is now asking to be involved in the process, offering their expertise to developers to map out burrows. An ACT government spokesperson insisted they do consider the impacts of infrastructure and fauna, including wombats, during the development assessment process. And
save the wombat, yes, because they are our and construction must go on. You can't stop progress, you can't stop development, but it must be done in a manner in which all these things are considered, consultation undertaken, and then the works should begin. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now let's go to today's hot topic and today's interview. So for the interview today, we are looking at child cancers in a new report titled Childhood Cancer Survival and Avoided Deaths in Australia, 1983 to 2016. Researchers found that due to improvements in survival over the last 40 years, the actual number of deaths due to cancer among children under 15 years old has decreased. And this has been going on since 1990s. Compared to the expected number of deaths, if survival rates had remained the same, they concluded that the survival for childhood has continued to improve over recent years due to ongoing progress in the development of new and better treatments combined with improved supportive care. So that is very important, and it is good to see that that's happening. So today, for the first segment, we have got two experts talking to me today. First is Associate Professor Danny Youlden, who is from the Cancer Council of Queensland and as a researcher. So thank you very much for joining in. So Professor Danny, the first question I've got for you is, why was this research undertaken?
One of the main intentions of our work is to continue to spur efforts towards ensuring that all children diagnosed with cancer can face the future with hope.
And that is a very, very good point there, Professor. So, so when you looked at this research, what did the research actually look into?
Cancer Council Queensland funds and manages the Australian Childhood Cancer Registry, which is one of the most comprehensive and longest running databanks of childhood cancer anywhere in the world. We use data from the registry to investigate two key questions. Firstly, how has survival for childhood cancer changed over the last 4 decades? And secondly, how many young deaths have potentially been avoided due to improvements in survival since the 1980s?
Okay, and so that's a very, very good report trying to look at those rates there. So, looking at all of those, so what are the key findings in survival rates? Because, that's what we were all working towards.
In this study, we examined records for 21,000 Australian children who were under 15 years of age and diagnosed between 1983 and 2016. We found that survival for all cancers combined improved from 73% for those who were diagnosed during the 1980s up to 86% for those who were diagnosed more recently. Significant gains in survival were found across many different types of childhood cancer. However, there were a few exceptions where there was little or no improvement in survival, including certain types of brain tumours, bone cancer and liver cancer.
And thank you very much for that. Of course, those survival rates are very, very encouraging. Now, of course, the other part is, we looked at the survival rates. What about avoided deaths? So what are the key findings, when we look at the area of avoided deaths?
In the second part of the study, we estimated that in total more than 1,500 deaths due to childhood cancer were potentially avoided within 5 years of diagnosis between 1995 and 2016 as a direct consequence of the gains in survival that occurred prior to then. Put another way, this equates to preventing more than 1 out of every 3 childhood cancer deaths that would have occurred throughout Australia since the mid-1990s had survival not improved.
Well, that is once again a very, very good result. So what does this research mean for Australian children?
In terms of what this research means, survival for Australian children diagnosed with cancer is as good, if not better, than for children in other similar countries such as the United States and the United Kingdom. The families of children with cancer can be confident that their child is receiving the best possible medical care here in Australia.
Well, that is a wonderful result that, we are on par, if not better, than some of the other countries in the world. Professor Danny Youlden, thank you so much for being on the show. Next up, we'll try and connect with Dr. Andy Moore, a pediatric oncologist at Queensland Children's Hospital and Associated Professor at University of Queensland. So Professor, once again, welcome to the show. Question to you is, what is the reason for improvements in childhood cancer survival?
So overall, the improvement in childhood cancer survival has really been driven by clinical trials and internationally collaborative clinical trials, as well as improvements in supportive care. And that's really been the hallmark of childhood cancer survival improvement over the last 50 to 60 years.
And that is wonderful, and thank you so much for all the work that you people all do towards that. So what is being done for cancers that have not shown any improvement? As we know, there are various kinds of cancers. Some have shown improvement, some haven't. So my question to you is, what is being done about the cancers that have not shown signs of improvement?
So whilst we've seen some really great improvements in childhood cancer survival overall, there's still a number of cancers where the survival improvements haven't been realised yet, and there's still relatively poor outcomes. That's particular for a number of brain tumours and also some of the bone tumours, sarcomas for example. And the key to improving outcomes for the children with those types of cancers is to leverage the unprecedented information that we're getting from genomic analyses of tumours, so next generation sequencing and other techniques to understand what are the abnormalities inside those cancer cells that's made it a cancer cell in the first place and what's driving its growth and its behaviour. There are a number of drugs that are able to switch off those processes or alternatively switch on processes that the cancer cell have turned off. That's in general a way that new cancer drugs work. They either turn something on that's been switched off or turn something off that's been abnormally switched on by the cancer cell. And then in addition to that, there's some new and exciting immunotherapy approaches to target cancers, and we're hoping that we can see those introduced more and more to paediatric oncology as well. We've already had some great success in a number of immunotherapy approaches to treatment in leukemia and neuroblastoma, for example, as well. There's still a long way to go. So those difficult to treat tumours where the outcomes are still yet to improve significantly, there's a long way to go. We hope that some of our more targeted therapies, or precision medicine is another term that gets used for specifically targeting the abnormalities in cancer cells, that holds a lot of promise to see those improvements continue over the coming years.
And Dr. Andy Moore, that is wonderful to see that happening because we know that there are many areas which have not shown improvements, and it is good to see that the research is ongoing. So, looking at the research, and of course, specifically today we are talking about the children and child. So, what has this research meant for childhood cancer survival?
So one of the really nice things that we've shown in this paper is that not only have survival rates improved for a number of cancers, but what that's meant is that there are at least 1,500 children alive today that would have otherwise not survived their cancer over a period of approximately 20 years. And that's really driven by a number of efforts. One of the most important ones is international collaborative clinical trials led by large groups of childhood cancer centres around the world, which Australia contributes significantly to.
Good to see that Australia is making that contribution there as well. And of course we know about this the childhood cancer registry. So what does it do and how does it help people?
Still a very long way to go, both for patients that do very well and those that have a lower cure rate. So it's a long way to go, but importantly it's all informed and underpinned by quality data, and that's what the Australian Childhood Cancer Registry, hosted by the Cancer Council of Queensland, is such a valuable resource because it gives us such good quality data to help us understand where we've come from, where we're going, and what our childhood cancer outcomes are for Australian children.
And thank you very much for that, Dr. Andy Moore from the Queensland Children's Hospital and Associate Professor at University of Queensland. And my first guest was Professor Danny Youlden, who is a researcher as well. So when we're looking at this, there is so much that's already being done out there in the field of research, especially into prevention of cancer and, of course, treating children of cancer as well. Ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to our daily India report.
Welcome to the Daily India Report that brings you reports, interviews, features and much more on India and the Indian diaspora. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to attend virtual BRICS summit on Chinese president's invitation. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will attend the annual summit of the five-nation grouping BRICS on June 23rd and 24th following an invitation by the Chinese President Xi Jinping. China is hosting the summit in its capacity as its chair of the grouping for the current year. The BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa brings together five of the largest developing countries in the world, representing 41% of the global population, 24% of the global GDP and 16% of the global trade. Russian President Vladimir Putin, Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa are set to attend the summit. It is said that BRICS has become a platform for discussing and deliberating on issues of common concern for all developing countries, adding the grouping has regularly called for the reform of the multilateral system to make it more representative and inclusive. Discussions during the 14th BRICS summit are expected to cover intra-BRICS cooperation in areas such as counter-terrorism, trade, health, traditional medicine, environment, science and technology and innovation, agriculture, technical and vocational education and training, and MSMEs. It said discussions are also likely on issues like reform of multilateral system, combating the COVID-19 pandemic and global economic recovery, amongst others. Saudi Arabia lifts COVID-19 travel ban on citizens travelling to India. Saudi Arabia lifted coronavirus travel restrictions on June 28th on its citizens travelling to Turkey, India, Ethiopia and Vietnam. Earlier this month, Saudi Arabia lifted measures imposed to prevent the spread of the virus, including a requirement to wear face masks indoors. The oil-rich kingdom has already started receiving pilgrims for the annual Hajj season that gets underway in a few weeks. On May 23rd, Saudi Arabia banned its citizens from travelling to India and 15 other countries following a rise in COVID-19 cases. On June 13th, Saudi Arabia announced the lifting of precautionary and preventive measures related to combating the COVID-19 pandemic. On June 18th, Saudi's Directorate General of Passports announced that expatriates could enter and leave the kingdom without requiring them to be vaccinated against COVID-19. India records over 12,000 new COVID-19 cases in 24 hours. India on June 22nd reported at least 12,249 new COVID-19 cases. According to the Union Health Ministry data, the number of active cases increased to 81,687 in the country. India also reported 13 new COVID-related deaths in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of fatalities to 5,24,903 to date. Active cases comprise 0.19% of the total infections. The national COVID-19 recovery rate was recorded at 98.60%, the Health Ministry said. An increase of 2,374 cases has been recorded in the active COVID-19 caseload in a span of 24 hours. The daily positivity rate was recorded at 3.94% and the weekly positivity rate at 2.90%, the ministry said. BA.2.38, a subvariant of Omicron strain, has become a dominating strain in Mumbai and Pune cities of Maharashtra. 450 Indian Sikh pilgrims reached Pakistan for Maharaja Ranjit Singh's death anniversary. A group of 450 Sikh pilgrims on June 21st arrived in Pakistan's Lahore from India to observe the 183rd death anniversary of the first ruler of the Sikh Empire, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. The Evacuee Trust Property Board, which looks after the holy places of minorities in Pakistan, and Pakistan Gurdwara Sikh Prabandhak Committee officials received them at the Wagah border. The main event will be held at Dera Sahib on June 29th. He said that a langar lunch was served to all visiting Sikh pilgrims at Wagah before their departure for Gurdwara Janmistan Nankana Sahib, some 80 kilometers from Lahore. During their stay, the pilgrims would also visit the Kartarpur Sahib Gurdwara. Hashmi said that Pakistani government had issued visas to 500 Indian Sikhs. However, 450 turned up. Maharaja Ranjit Singh was the founder of the Sikh Empire, which ruled the northwest Indian subcontinent in the early half of the 19th century. The issuance of visas to Indian Sikhs is covered under the framework of the Pakistan-India Protocol on visits to religious shrines of 1974. Senior diplomat Ruchira Kamboj is appointed India's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. Senior diplomat Ruchira Kamboj on June 21st was appointed India's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. Kamboj, a 1987 batch Indian Foreign Service officer, is presently serving as India's envoy to Bhutan. She will succeed T.S. Tirumurthy as the Indian ambassador to the UN. Kamboj is expected to take up the assignment shortly, the Ministry of External Affairs said in a brief statement. Kamboj was the All India Women's Toppers of 1987 Civil Services batch and the topper of the Foreign Service batch of that year. She began her diplomatic journey to Paris in France, where she was posted as a third secretary in the Indian Embassy in France from 1989 to 1991. From Paris, she returned to Delhi, where she worked as an under-secretary in the Europe West Division of the Ministry of External Affairs from 1991 to 96, and from 1996 to 1999, she served in Mauritius as First Secretary Economic and Commercial and the head of Chancery at the Indian High Commission in Port Louis. India ranks 4th in global gold recycling, recycled 75 tons in 2021. India has emerged as the 4th largest recycler in the world, and the country has recycled 75 tons in 2021 according to the World Gold Council report. According to the World Gold Council report titled Gold Refining and Recycling, China topped the global gold recycling chart as it recycled 168 tons of yellow metal, followed by Italy in the second position with 80 tons and US ranking third with 78 tons in 2021. India was ranked 4th in the list as the country recycled 75 tons in 2021. According to the WGC report titled Gold Refining and Recycling, from 300 tons in 2013, India's gold refining capacity increased by 1500 tons, close to 500% in 2021. The report further noted that the gold refining landscape in the country has changed over the last decade, with the number of formal operations increasing from less than 5 in 2013 to 33 in 2021. While the informal sector accounts for as much as additional 300 to 500 tons, it is worth noting the scale of unrecognized refining has fallen largely due to the government's tightening of pollution regulations. At 15 degrees Celsius, Srinagar records the coldest June day in 7 years. With the mercury falling to 15 degrees Celsius on June 21st, Srinagar in Jammu and Kashmir territory recorded the coldest June day in 7 years, according to the Indian Meteorological Department. Srinagar recorded a similar temperature on June 4, 2015. At 15 degrees Celsius, the day temperature in J&K's summer capital was 14.2 degrees Celsius below normal, a record-breaking low. Kashmir_weather, a prominent weather spotter in the valley, in a tweet said, Srinagar experiences the coldest June day in at least 48 years. Srinagar recorded a maximum temperature of 15 degrees Celsius on June 21st, which is the coldest June day since 1975. The temperature remained 14.2 degrees Celsius below normal. A temperature of 15 degrees Celsius is very common in February for Srinagar. Intermittent rains had been lashing Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh territories for 4 days, causing the day temperature to drop by around 10 to 11 degrees. Earlier this week, the maximum temperature in the valley had been 32 degrees Celsius. However, it plunged to around 20 degrees Celsius in most areas. Ajay Devgan starrer Drishyam 2 is set to release on the big screens on November 18th. Good news for all Ajay Devgan fans, as his upcoming film Drishyam 2 is all set to be released on November 18th. Apart from Ajay Devgan, Akshay Khanna and Tabu are also part of the star cast. Directed by Abhishek Pathak, the film is a sequel to the 2015 crime thriller Drishyam. The sequel of the Malayali version was released in February last year. The story revolves around a family of 4 whose lives are turned upside down following an unfortunate incident that happens to their older daughter. Devgan will be seen again in his role of Vijay Sangulkar in the sequel. Promising to take it much higher in thrill, drama and excitement, the sequel will take Vijay and his family's story beyond imagination, a note from the makers read. The sequel also features Shriya Saran, Rajat Kapoor and Ishita Datta. The team will wrap the shoot in Hyderabad soon. Akshay Kumar starrer Raksha Bandhan trailer is finally out.
क्या गारंटी है कि आपको गोलगप्पे खाने से लड़का ही होगा?
25 रुपए के गोलगप्पे के साथ साथ सर्टिफिकेट भी दे दे तुझे। इतने सालों से इंतजार कर रही है तू इस आदमी का? कभी अपनी बहनों की शादी करेगा, कब तेरे से शादी होगी? खुद तो अपनी माँ को वचन देके मर्यादा पुरुषोत्तम राम हो गया और मेरे को बना लिया साला जटायु।
The trailer of the much-awaited Akshay Kumar starrer film Raksha Bandhan is finally out. The film has Akshay Kumar and Bhumi Pednekar in lead roles. The film showcases the love, the bonding and attachment between brother and his sisters. On June 20th, Akshay released a poster of the film. As promised, the makers unveiled the trailer that showed a story of love, joy, family and unbreakable bond that binds brothers and sisters. In the clip, Akshay can be seen arguing with his girlfriend Bhumi Pednekar because of his sisters. He first wants his 4 sisters to get married and then tie the knot with the love of his life. However, given the circumstances, Akshay finds himself in a difficult situation where he could lose his girlfriend forever.
तेरे साथ हूँ मैं।
That's all in today's bulletin.
And thank you very much for that update. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have for you in today. Don't forget that tomorrow, Friday, we get back again at 10 a.m. Until then, it's goodbye from us.